Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
My cousin Brad laughed, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Still living in that shoebox downtown, Jenna? Must suck waking up next to your microwave." My grandma chuckled, like it was some sitcom punchline she'd heard 1,000 times before. And maybe it was to them. The family clown takes a jab, everyone chuckles, and Jenna shrinks an inch deeper into the worn-out fabric of invisibility. That was always my role, wasn't it? Not the golden child, not the success story, just the odd one out who never played by their rules. I hadn't been back for Thanksgiving in 2 years. And trust me, it wasn't for lack of invitation. It was self-preservation. If you've ever sat at a table where everyone smiles with knives hidden behind polite questions, you know what I mean. Still single, Jenna? How's that little job of yours going? Don't you want a real life someday? They always ask like it's concern, but the undertone is sharp and unmistakable, judgment in slow motion, wrapped in cranberry sauce and fake smiles. But this year, I came back. Not because I missed the green bean casserole or Uncle Dave's slurred attempts at grace. No, I came back because I had something to say. And no, not with words. With action. With silence. With a pair of shiny silver keys sitting quietly in the bottom of my purse. The house smelled the same, stale, warm, a mix of old wood and too much cinnamon. Grandma Evelyn had decorated early, of course, with her obsessive little porcelain turkeys on the mantel and plastic fall leaves tangled around the chandelier. She greeted me with that tight-lipped smile of hers, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. "Look who finally decided to show her face," she said, and I smiled politely, letting it roll off like I had practiced. Twice, in the car. Dinner was loud. Uncle Dave was already half a bottle in by the time the turkey hit the table, and my mom kept asking if I needed a sweater even though the thermostat was set to what I could only describe as Florida in July. Brad arrived late, as usual, wearing a blazer way too expensive for a family dinner, his hair styled like he'd just stepped out of a luxury car commercial. He kissed Grandma on the cheek, clapped Uncle Dave on the back, then gave me the same up-down he always did. That subtle once-over, like he was assessing property value. We were halfway through the mashed potatoes when it started. It always starts subtle. Grandma asks, "How's your apartment, dear? Still near that little convenience store?" She means the one with the flickering sign and the shouting matches outside. I say, "Yeah, still there," and Brad pounces like a hyena smelling fresh meat. He leans back in his chair, sets down his wine glass, and says it like he's delivering a monologue. "Still living in that shoebox downtown, Jenna? Must suck waking up next to your microwave." Everyone laughs. Even Mom cracks a smile, though I see the apology in her eyes. That's how it always goes. That's how it's supposed to go. But this time, I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I reached into my purse, pulled out the keyring, and laid it gently next to my plate. Not with drama. Not with a speech. Just metal against wood, with the kind of quiet confidence that makes people shut up before they even realize why. They all stared. Grandma's fork froze midair. Uncle Dave squinted. Brad leaned forward, still smirking but now curious. "What's that?" he asked. I smiled, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, "Closed yesterday." The silence that followed could have sliced through the turkey. His smirk faltered for just a second. "Wait, closed on what?" he asked. "A house," I said casually, taking a sip of my wine. "Bought my first one. It's cute. Has a backyard. Big kitchen, plenty of space. Even has one of those islands you always talk about loving, Grandma." You could hear the slow click of thoughts forming in Brad's head. Like a safe slowly cracking open behind his eyeballs. He was trying to figure it out. What neighborhood? When did I find the time? How did he not know? "I didn't see you at any open houses," Brad said slowly. "Maybe you weren't looking," I replied. Grandma cleared her throat. "Well, isn't that something?" she muttered. She didn't smile this time. Not even a fake one. The table sat in stunned silence, every face trying to recalibrate who I was now. Not Jenna the failure. Not Jenna the renter. Jenna the homeowner. Jenna with keys. Jenna with a secret. And Brad? Brad just stared at those keys like they might explode. But they wouldn't explode. They'd already detonated. And the shrapnel hadn't even started to fly yet. The room held that strange kind of silence you only get when something shifts that wasn't supposed to, like when the wind changes in a place that's always still, or when a loudmouth finally shuts up. And everyone realizes they don't know what to do without his noise filling the air. I could feel it in the heat of Grandma's dining room, the way everyone suddenly remembered their forks had food on them, but no one actually brought anything to their mouth. My keys, still sitting next to my plate, suddenly looked louder than any of Brad's cheap shots had ever sounded. And oh, he hated that. He leaned in, elbows on the table like he was about to cross-examine me, the damn courtroom attorney of the dinner table. "So, where'd you find this place?" he asked, voice dripping with forced casualness, but I could hear the edge starting to curl at the corners. I took another bite of turkey, chewed slowly, then swallowed like I had all the time in the world. "Oh, I said, reaching for the gravy like we were still pretending this was a normal dinner, online listing, quick turnaround, kinda fell into place." Uncle Dave raised his eyebrows, slurring a little. "That market's brutal right now. I mean, closing in, what, a week or two? That's fast. How the hell do you manage that?" His tone wasn't hostile, just confused, maybe even a little impressed, though I knew that wouldn't last long. I shrugged. "Made a clean offer, cash deal, no contingencies." I didn't want to play games. Brad narrowed his eyes. "Cash?" he repeated, like the word had a taste he didn't trust. "You bought a house in cash?" I smiled and dabbed at the corner of my mouth with my napkin, the way I'd seen Grandma do every Thanksgiving of my childhood, when she used to correct my posture and tell me to chew with my mouth closed. "Saved up. Had some help." He scoffed a little, loud enough for the table to hear, trying to pull the power back. "I mean, sure, but what neighborhood are we talking here? If you got a house under, what, 350? Then you either robbed someone or it's falling apart." Grandma chimed in then, maybe because the silence was starting to make her itch. "You didn't tell me you were house hunting, Jenna. That seems like the kind of thing you'd mention to your grandmother." She didn't say it with warmth, either. It was sharp, like I'd broken some unspoken code by not inviting her into my decisions. As if she'd ever asked about my life when it wasn't to compare it to someone else's. "Well," I said, twisting my wine glass slowly between my fingers. I didn't want to say anything until it was official. "You know how things fall through. Didn't want to jinx it." "Still," Brad said, voice tightening, "you can't just stumble into a decent house right now. Not in this market. And definitely not in cash. Where is it anyway?" I took a deep breath like I was about to answer, and then just said North Side. That one word dropped like a bowling ball. Because North Side wasn't just some random direction, it was prime real estate. School district gold, wide streets, backyards with actual grass, and just enough old charm to keep the yuppies from ripping everything down and replacing it with glass boxes. Brad's smirk was gone. He was trying to keep his face neutral, but I could see it happening in real time. The calculations, the backtracking, the mental list of every Northside listing he'd handled in the past month. "How many square feet?" he asked, leaning forward, voice tighter now, almost strained. I leaned back, pretending to think, like it wasn't already printed into the folds of my memory. "A little over 1,020, give or take," I said slowly. "Then, just to keep it interesting," I added, "which is like, what, 20 square miles or something, right?" That got a few chuckles, even from Mom, who I could tell was trying to figure out how much of this was real and how much was just me playing a long game she didn't know existed. Brad didn't laugh. He was staring at me now, really staring, like I'd said something that didn't sit right. He didn't respond immediately. He was flipping through some mental Rolodex, face frozen mid-thought, trying to place the numbers. I let the silence hang. "You said Northside?" he finally asked, eyes narrowing. I said, sipping again. His hand went to his chin. "Garage? Yep. Corner lot? Yep. And then it hit him. Right there, across from the sweet potatoes and stuffing, like a brick to the forehead. His brow furrowed. "Wait, hold on," he said, voice suddenly sharp. Wait, that's my listing." Everyone's heads turned to him, then to me, then back again. Forks were frozen halfway to mouths. Grandma's eyes were darting, trying to make sense of it. I just raised my glass in his direction and smiled. Cheers. For a few painful seconds after I said it, nobody at that dinner table seemed to breathe, and the tension was so thick it could have been sliced with a cheap steak knife wrapped inside Grandma's napkin ring. Brad just stared at me like he was trying to read a foreign language, like suddenly I was someone he didn't recognize, someone speaking in riddles and codes he hadn't been let in on. "That's my listing," he said again, this time softer, more to himself than to anyone else, as if the realization hadn't quite finished crawling its way up his spine yet. I didn't say a word, just looked at him calmly, like the answer was sitting right there in front of him, and he only needed to do the math. And math, as it turned out, wasn't his strong suit unless it was profit margins and commission percentages, and right now, he was starting to realize that something in his precious numbers didn't add up. "That property," he said, shaking his head, "sat on the market for 2 months. I dropped the price twice trying to move it. I sold it to some LLC out of state. All cash. No inspection. Wait, how the hell?" He stopped short, and his mouth opened like he wanted to say something else, but nothing came out. Just air and confusion and dawning horror. Uncle Dave, who until now had been preoccupied with his whiskey and barely tracking the conversation, finally perked up, his voice slightly slurred but still sharp enough to slice. "You sold her a house and didn't know it?" he asked, a grin crawling up his face, half impressed, half amused. "You really dropped the ball on that one, didn't you, champ?" Brad turned toward him, glaring like a cornered dog. "I didn't know it was her," he snapped. "It came through a holding company, Tansy Holdings. I assumed it was out-of-state investors. I didn't even meet the buyer directly." "Well, you're meeting her now," I said with a small smile, my tone syrupy sweet, but with just enough acid underneath to sting. "Hi." His jaw tightened, and I could see the muscle twitching near his temple. He looked like someone had just handed him a wrapped present and told him it was ticking. "You used a holding company?" he said, more accusation than question. I raised my eyebrows. "Isn't that what all the smart people do these days? At least that's what your webinar said last year, remember? Shield your assets, avoid the noise." Pretty catchy. Brad stood up so suddenly his chair scraped across the hardwood floor, making everyone flinch. Grandma's porcelain turkey wobbled on the mantel behind him, and for a second I wished it would crash to the ground just to underline the moment. "You screwed me," he said, voice low and angry, as if saying it too loud would make it real. "No," I said, still seated, still calm. "I bought a house you couldn't move, at a price you set, under terms you accepted. If that feels like screwing, maybe you need to get better at your job." He didn't sit down. He just stood there, looming over the table like a failed god, stripped of thunder and title. His whole identity was tied up in being the guy who made the deals, who called the shots, who told stories about closing 3 units in a single weekend and bragged about his monthly earnings like it was a competition the rest of us had forgotten we were even in. And now here I was, the family's so-called screw-up, playing chess while he was still fiddling with checkers. Grandma cleared her throat in that sharp way she does when the air gets too uncomfortable for her liking. "Jenna," she said, her voice clipped, "why didn't you just say something if you were buying a house?" I looked at her and shrugged. "Because I knew you'd all make it about yourselves," I said, not bothering to coat it in sugar. "And I didn't want to be talked out of doing something that finally felt like mine." Brad's eyes were still locked on me, unblinking. "You let me sell you a house at a discount," he said slowly, the sentence clearly hurting to form, like chewing glass. "You let yourself," I said, standing now, matching his height, matching his energy. "I was just another buyer in your inbox, remember? Maybe next time, do your homework." Uncle Dave let out a low whistle and leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Damn," he muttered. "Didn't see that one coming." Brad looked at him, then back at me, and for a split second I thought he might actually throw his wine glass against the wall. But instead, he sat down hard, rubbed his face with both hands, and stared at the table like it had personally betrayed him. I could have stopped there. Could have let it end with him stewing in the bitter soup of his own misjudgment. But I wasn't quite done. I had one more match to strike. "Oh," I said, casually, as if it just occurred to me. "The LLC? Tansy Holdings." His head snapped up. "Yeah," he said, guarded now. "What about it?" I leaned in, just slightly, so only he and a few others could hear. "The C," I said softly, "isn't for me." His eyes widened instantly, and I could see the blood drain from his face. "Wait," he said, blinking fast. "Who the hell is the C?" I smiled and said nothing. It wasn't luck, and it damn sure wasn't coincidence. People like Brad live in a fantasy where they believe they're always 5 steps ahead, always the ones with the knowledge, the leverage, the upper hand. But the truth is, all it takes is one quiet player moving just outside their field of vision to make the whole chessboard shift under their feet. And that player was Tyler. Tyler Carson, my best friend since college, the one person who always had my back even when I wasn't sure I had anything worth protecting. He had a sharp mind, a sharper tongue, and a corporate law degree that could peel the skin off a lie without even raising his voice. And while I sat through years of family dinners swallowing my pride with dry turkey, Tyler was watching, taking mental notes, and reminding me, every time I questioned my own worth, that playing small just kept people like Brad comfortable. The plan started 2 months before Thanksgiving over coffee and rage. I had just lost a rental bidding war to some tech couple from San Francisco who offered a year up front, and I came home that night to find a holiday invite from Grandma sitting smugly in my inbox. I didn't even open it. I just forwarded it to Tyler and typed one word: revenge. He called me 20 minutes later. "So," he said, calm as ever, "you want to buy a house, and you want to buy it from that smug jackass cousin of yours without him knowing until it's too late." "Exactly," I said, already picturing the look on Brad's face. Tyler had connections. Not shady ones, just efficient ones. He worked in corporate mergers where hiding buyer identities was standard procedure, and he knew exactly how to build a shell company that would pass any surface-level due diligence Brad might bother doing. We called it Tansy Holdings, short for Tyler and Carson, but the initials could mean anything if someone asked. He made sure the paperwork was airtight, and we started hunting. I didn't want just any house. I wanted one he was having trouble selling. Something that had been sitting long enough to make him sweat, just enough to make him eager for a clean deal. We found the one on North Side through a mutual friend who tipped us off that Brad was trying to unload it quietly. The owners had moved out of state and wanted it gone fast. Brad had priced it too high, of course, because his ego wouldn't let him list something realistic. But after 2 price drops and 0 offers, he was hungry, vulnerable, and just dumb enough to fall for a full cash buyer waiving no contingencies and a 2-week close. Tyler made the offer, signed all the documents under the LLC, and coordinated everything through Brad's assistant, who apparently handled most of the actual work while Brad was busy filming real estate tip videos in front of rented cars. Not once did Brad speak to the buyer directly. Not once did he ask who was really behind the deal. He was just happy to finally get it off his books and collect his commission. That commission, by the way, was about $12,000 lower than it should have been, thanks to a little clause Tyler snuck into the offer, something Brad either didn't read or didn't understand. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even that unusual. But it was calculated, and it hurt him exactly where it mattered, his pride. The deed transferred the Monday before Thanksgiving. I held the keys in my hand on Tuesday, walked the hardwood floors in silence on Wednesday, and tucked them neatly into my purse Thursday morning, right before heading to Grandma's. Not once did I feel guilty. Not once did I second-guess it. But that changed a little when Mom pulled me aside after dinner. She wasn't angry, not exactly. But her face had that look, like I'd kicked a dog or cursed in church. You lied to your family, she said, quietly, once everyone else had disappeared into the kitchen or the backyard to recover from the explosion at the table. No, I replied, not defensive, but firm. I stopped letting my family lie to me. She shook her head slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line, like she didn't know whether to be proud or disappointed. You planned this, she said. You played your cousin. I bought a house, Mom, I said. Everything else was just bonus. She didn't say anything after that. Just gave me the same look she always gave when I did something she never had the guts to, half admiration, half fear. And honestly, that was the most honest moment we'd had in years. Back in the dining room, Brad was pacing like a caged animal, the veins in his neck pulsing while Uncle Dave tried and failed to calm him down. He turned toward me as I re-entered, eyes bloodshot, pointing like a man ready to accuse, but too tired to land a punch. You screwed me over, he said loudly, sharp enough for everyone left in the room to hear. I raised an eyebrow and set my empty wine glass on the table. I just bought a house, Brad, I said calmly. If that screwed you over, maybe you priced it wrong. And then I walked out to the porch, where the air was cool and the sky hung quiet above me, wondering if I'd feel different in the morning. But I already knew the answer. By the time dessert hit the table, the energy in the house had shifted so dramatically it felt like we were all standing on a different floor than the one we'd started on. The air was thicker now, not with the smell of pumpkin pie or overbaked pecan crusts, but with unease and unspoken accusations that clung to the corners of the room like stale smoke. Grandma, who normally would have forced a second slice of pie on me and pushed Brad into some long-winded story about closing sales and handshakes, was sitting quietly with her napkin folded neatly in her lap, her mouth drawn in a tight line like she was chewing on something bitter that didn't have anything to do with food. No one talked about the house after that. Not directly. They just kept glancing at me with those half-curious, half-wary looks that said more than words ever could. Brad had gone silent, which in itself was a kind of small miracle. Though his silence wasn't peaceful, it was the kind that crackled just beneath the skin, the kind that makes you wonder if the person next to you is about to explode or walk out or both. I finished my coffee slowly, more out of habit than desire, and when the last bite of pie was swallowed and the table began to empty, I stood up without a word and started gathering my coat. The night had played out exactly the way I'd wanted it to, and yet there was a strange ache sitting somewhere low in my ribs, a dull reminder that even when you win, sometimes the win still costs something. Mom met me by the front door, her eyes scanning mine for some hint of regret or triumph or maybe both, but I didn't give her anything. She reached for a hug, and I let her have it, brief and a little stiff, because that was our way, love that never quite found its full volume. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap, sharp and clean after the humidity of the dining room. The sky was bruised with winter clouds, thick and unmoving, and the neighborhood stood quiet except for the faint hum of someone's television through a cracked window down the block. I had made it all the way to the edge of the driveway before I heard the door swing open behind me. Jenna. Brad's voice rang out, sharp and unsteady, his footsteps following fast. I didn't turn around, just kept walking toward the street, where I knew what was coming. Jenna, stop. We're not done. I paused at the curb, one hand tucked into my coat pocket, the other holding the car keys like a talisman. His voice was right behind me now, heated and breathy, the way it gets when someone thinks they've been made a fool of and can't quite accept that the story is over. You planned this whole thing, he hissed, standing just behind my shoulder. You wanted to embarrass me, right? You wanted to screw me in front of everyone. I turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes, but not enough to give him the full attention he craved. I bought a house, I said flatly. You were the one who bragged about selling it. Don't blame me because the script flipped. He stared at me for a beat too long, and I could see it again, that scramble in his head, trying to rewrite what had happened into something where he still held the upper hand. but it was gone. He'd lost it the moment he'd sent that acceptance email to Tyler, the moment he let his ego blind him to the details. Then, right on cue, the sleek black car pulled up along the curb, engine humming low, headlights cutting through the night like a blade. The passenger window slid down, and there he was, Tyler, sharp as ever in a charcoal coat, his eyes glinting with just enough amusement to make the moment burn. Brad's confusion deepened, and I saw the flicker of something old in his eyes, some memory trying to surface. I opened the door, slid one foot inside, and then turned back to him with the final nail in the coffin. "You know what the C in Tansy stands for, Brad?" I asked, keeping my voice soft, almost too gentle. "It's Carrington." His face twisted instantly, recognition colliding with realization in a glorious mess of discomfort. "Tyler Carrington," I continued, lowering myself into the car. "You know, your ex's brother." He went pale like the blood just gave up and retreated from his skin entirely. His mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out, not even the fake charm or phony bravado he'd worn so comfortably all evening. Just shock. Pure, naked, personal. I looked at him one last time and didn't smile, didn't wink, didn't offer some snarky final jab. Instead, I said the one thing I knew would stick in his ribs long after the car pulled away. "I didn't do it to hurt you, Brad. I did it to remind you. People remember the way you treat them, even if they wait 10 years to show it." And with that, I shut the door. Tyler hit the gas, the car sliding smoothly down the block as Brad stood frozen in the driveway behind us, a man stripped bare under the porch light of a house that wasn't his anymore. There was no victory dance, no cheers or applause, just the steady hum of the engine and the silence of a night that had said more than words ever could. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I knew exactly what I'd left behind. And I knew it would never feel like Thanksgiving to him again.